This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. I'm Eve Engler. I'm coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of the various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And we're at about I think towards like 100 Canadian Foreign Policy Hours, about a year and a half, a little bit more than a year and a half of these. Um, it's a weekly critical look at Canada's role internationally. And first off, this week, the Globe today has a column that says that Canada is on the cusp of producing 5 million barrels of oil a day, which is the highest ever, which is obviously just confirms that we're just continuing on with the fossil fuel extraction expansion, despite the rhetoric from the Liberal government. Others, they are not doing anything close to what's necessary to stop Canada's outsized contribution to the climate crisis. The Haiti, a number of developments on Haiti, which I haven't been able to follow as closely as I would like, because there's so much going on with regards to the genocide in Gaza. But a court in Kenya confirmed blocking of, they did an initial judgment a few weeks ago, but they have blocked Kenya from sending 1,000 or so police to Haiti, which basically kiboshes the U.S. plan to have Kenya lead a mission to Haiti and then get other countries to fall in behind that. Canada, of course, was supportive of that process, and the court is not accepting this. I don't know how firm this is legally within Kenyan structure and how, if it's possible to get this overturned, but at least in the short term, it's stopping the mission, which is also, I think, is a good thing, of course. And there's been a whole bunch of hype. There's a real correlation between whenever there's UN discussions of Haiti, and you start seeing all these articles about kidnapping or violence in Haiti, which is both a real problem and an exaggerated problem. But you see that in recent days. Another development is that February 7th is the time when Ariel Henry said he will step down as the appointed leader of the country, obviously appointed by the U.S. and Canada through a tweet. It's not clear what's going to happen on February 7th. He doesn't have any legitimacy. He doesn't have any constitutional legitimacy, doesn't have any popular legitimacy. And as of February 7th, he will have surpassed, even when he said he was going to step down. February 7th is the traditional handover of power day in Haiti. So that's not clear where that's going to go, what Canada and the U.S.'s reaction is going to be. A few weeks ago, the U.S. Sent back Guy Philippe, who had been in jail in the U.S. for, I think, 6 years, something like that, who was the leader of he was the face of the military assault against the elected government back in 2004. Joseph Champlain may have actually been the leader, but one of the leaders, Guy Philippe, Joseph Champlain was with the FRAP during the first coup in the early 90s, so he was already known as this serious criminal kind of thug, and so it was better to have Guy Philippe as the face, and he's a younger guy, good-looking guy, etc. So, but Guy Philippe's back, and he'd been in jail in the U.S. for drug stuff for a while, and was
Okay,
just
great. I'll tell you, it's a
totally
bonus
wild
on the
in that.
verify that you got that done, Minos.
Sorry, somebody has, I forgot to hit the unmute, not let people mute themselves. But so, yeah, I just did hit that. So if you're unmuted, please mute yourself. And so Philippe was put in U.S. jail for gun or for drug related stuff. And it basically, when he started talking publicly about who was funding him in 2004 and before 2004 to destabilize Aristide as government, the DEA, the Americans, pursued him. They left him alone, for years and years. It was like just literally as connected as like he goes to the radio, starts talking about who funded him, and a couple of days later, all of a sudden, he's being pursued on drug charges, which he had been involved in for everyone knew for years and years. So them sending him back, he's talking about organizing a force, apparently partly tied into this environmental force, which seems to have these sort of former kind of paramilitary types seem to have dominate, and Guy Philippe seems to be involved in potentially trying to take power through guns. Who knows where this is going to go? It's not a good sign. Philippe is not. He it's amazing. He wears a Che Guevara T-shirt, speaking to how broad sort of anti-imperialist sentiment is in Haiti and kind of revolutionary kind of ideas are. But he's decisively a man of the oligarchy, a man of Washington, but he's being let loose on the country, and we'll see where that all goes. Today, the foreign interference inquiry began. The hearings began in Ottawa. The Quebec judge, I believe, who's leading that, has started different testimony and whatnot. A big media issue. It's on the front page of the Globe and Mail. They have a story on the front page, and then they devote 2 pages in the middle of the paper saying the road to Canada's foreign interference inquiry from the Globe and Mail's reporting. And basically, it's a sort of boasting about how the Globe and Mail's reporting prompted all of this. Le Devoir also on the weekend had a big long story on this about whether the elections, the 43rd and 44th federal elections, there was foreign interference in those elections. So we're going back through this whole round. Now, on the front Globe, they have this big spread about Globe's role in prompting inquiry. On the front of the paper, it says human rights groups threaten to withdraw from interference inquiry. So all the groups have been pushing, the conservatives, the bunch of the groups have been pushing for the inquiry, are now basically casting aspersions on it, saying it's being, I don't know, jigged in favor of the Liberal Party. It's being it's not going to be a genuine affair, and they've been picking this. Has been hearing more of this. Of course, they did that with David Johnson's when he was looking into the whole question, and they got him to resign, and so on the front of the Globe, though, they quote the Uyghur activist Tati. I'm getting his first name. I think it's Metme Tati of the Uyghur Human Rights Advocacy Project. And they're basically saying he's pulling out. He's one of these human rights groups is apparently pulling out, saying it's all scandal. I'm not going to accept to be cross-examined by a few of the people that have been given this power. And it's a joke. I mean, it's beyond comedy. Tati is openly on their site talked about how the US government funded them for their work with the Canadian Parliament. So this guy who's like getting a bunch of American funding to convince Canadian parliamentarians to go along with the anti-China policy is having a big fit about how this foreign interference inquiry is not there's a senator, a Canadian senator he thinks is an agent of China, and a couple of other politicians who he thinks are agents of China. He's having a big fit about how this is an illegitimate foreign interference inquiry. And the Globe and Mail just, reports this ho-hum, nothing about Tati's ties to the U.S., to U.S. funding, to interfere in Canada. That doesn't count. That has nothing to do with foreign interference. Foreign interference, by definition, if you look it up in the dictionary, it says China interfering somewhere. That is what foreign interference means. It doesn't mean the U.S. It doesn't mean Israel. And we just keep going along with this kind of comical dimension. It did, a positive within the narrow confines of what's going on here, which is to focus on China mostly. It's been broadened a little bit with India being brought in, and I believe Russia's allowed in there. But of course, the broader discussion of foreign interference is not allowed to be had. And in the context of sort of this sort of anti-China stuff, it's important to fit that in the bigger picture, which a piece by John Price and another author in the Hill Times titled "The China Panic: Is Canada Risking War in the Pacific?" And this piece just goes through, nothing really new to us. We've covered this stuff in recent months, but it just brings together all of the increased Canadian militarism in the region, and it just sort of happens in steps. More Canadian naval vessels, more Canadian spy planes, more Canadian fighter jets, more participation in bases in Japan, more the WIMPAC, the big exercise that's coming up, and you get yourself into a position where you're increasingly close to a possible conflict, and that's kind of what the piece gets at. And obviously the foreign interference inquiry, which the Globe here quotes CSIS. He says is called the greatest strategic threat to national security. Right, Chinese state interference in Canada is, quote, the greatest strategic threat to national security. I think that's insane. I think the climate crisis is clearly a much greater a threat to national security. I would say housing affordability is a bigger crisis, and we can go through a whole long list of things that would be bigger than Chinese interference. And that's not to say, and if you go through the piece, you go through some of what the Globe covers, a bunch of what they say that CSIS is alleging of the Chinese government, I actually basically believe that's happening. I believe the Chinese government preferred to have the Liberals, or specific officials of the Chinese government in Canada, preferred to have the Liberals win in the 2021 election. Obviously, I mean, anyone who paid attention to the conservative rhetoric, or for that matter, the NDP, that makes complete sense. That would be crazy if the Chinese government didn't want that. And it would also be odd, I would say, that the Chinese government wasn't, paying attention to individuals, probably predominantly within the Chinese Canadian community, but not entirely, who would be, more likely to be sort of sympathetic to their outlook. I believe that they do that as well. I believe most embassies, any embassy in Canada that has the resources, thinks about ways that they can have some leverage. I don't think it's something that's particularly surprising. Now, they then take that and then they put step after step after step after step, and then China is this all-powerful entity, and et cetera, et cetera. And I would say it's very clear that with all the hysteria about the Chinese interference in the inquiry, that China is very clearly not this all-powerful entity that they kind of one hand presented as. But nonetheless, and so it's obviously this has geopolitical dangers, as the China Panic: Is Canada Risking War in the Pacific article highlights. The Globe a few days ago also published on the front page, for Ukrainian Nobel laureate, making peace with Russia would be surrender. and the Ukrainian who got the Peace Prize last year, saying that you can't surrender. And that's all. Everyone, that's fine. That person has that perspective. I don't think it's disconnected from winning the Nobel Peace Prize, and it's obviously not disconnected from why the Globe would put it on the front page. And this to me seems like all the stories coming out of Ukraine with regards to the difficulty in recruiting, the shortage of person power to fight the war. It seems like this is just fighting to the last Ukrainian, has been mentioned many, many times. But that's where things are at. The Globe also had a piece I think on Friday, titled "Ukrainian Canadian Group Criticizes Polyev for Voting Against Measures for Kyiv." So it's a big story about the pressure Ukrainian Canadian Group putting on the Conservatives for not being completely behind the NATO proxy war. So it does seem increasingly clear that the opposition to that is coming from a Trumpian Conservative Party dynamic, which is quite fascinating if that continues on in Canadian politics. There was also a story about how Canada's restarted arms exports to Turkey. There was suspension, and so that was part of the deal for Turkey to agree to Sweden joining NATO. One part of it, I think, was the U.S. selling F-16s to Turkey, and another part was Canada ending its restrictions on some of the mostly, I think, for drones, some of the high-tech parts of drones that had been suspended a few years ago because Azerbaijan was using them in their fighting with Armenia, and so that's been restricted as part of bringing Sweden into NATO. That's been ended, I should say. Also, we have 1,000 Canadian soldiers, aviators, special forces that are going to be participating in this the biggest, largest ever NATO exercise. It's coming up, I think, in a few days here. And that's taking place, I think, in a number of European countries, some of the Baltic states, I believe. And obviously, I think it's 90,000 NATO forces that are, close to the border with Russia that are going to be doing this exercise, which is, of course, would be, from a Russian perspective, would be viewed as threatening. NATO, of course, claims it's a defense of Russian aggression. So it's still kind of, while it's getting less attention, the war in Ukraine still has the possibility to escalate. NATO is still right there, and I think we should be calling for Canada to push for diplomacy. I think that it's not realistic at this point to expect Russia to just withdraw. But I think that ending the fighting with some degree of peace accord, maybe you can move towards some sort of referendum over time in the occupied parts of the country, and let the people there decide in a way that's possibly relatively democratic. That's probably not going to be easy to pull off, and I think at this point the Russians probably see that they have the upper hand, and they're probably going to keep pushing it. But you have to start somewhere to end the killing, which again still has the possibility to escalate. Now, on the Palestine question, the New York Times had a piece I read on the website last night. This big long piece about where Hamas gets its weapons, and the basic point is that most of Hamas's weapons come from Israel. and they come from Israel in a bunch of different ways. They've some that are like sort of stolen, some that are smuggled in. They've stolen from Israeli military depots, like guns and stuff like that, and some, I guess, probably, you know, people who sell guns within Israel and whatnot. Anyway, so get some like that. But the more interesting part of it, and probably more substantive part, is it's a lot of it is bombs Israel has bombed Gaza with that don't explode. So 10 to 15% don't explode, and they then, I don't understand how they do this, of course, but they get in there, take the material that can then be used to make bombs to send towards Israel, or to shoot at Israeli forces that are occupying in Gaza. And part of what's like, I think this article doesn't mention this at all, but part of why this is possible is because Israel has bombed Gaza so much. And I don't mean it just in the last 3.5 months, but Israel just bombed Gaza so much over so many years that Hamas has both learned how to do all this, and they have this, they say 10 to 15% of the bombs generally don't detonate. And so there's so many that they've been able to get and reuse, which I thought was just a kind of it's just a like remarkable comment on the brutality of Israel, the insanity of all this stuff, and so the New York Times says that back in December they were able to kill 10 Israeli soldiers with a booby trap, which was was a munition that Israel had launched unexploded. So you see how the cycle can just keep going by this kind of logic. Now, Israel yesterday bombed. They killed, according to Al Jazeera, 214 or 215 in the last 24 hours. So since the International Court of Justice made its ruling against Israel's genocidal policies, and it was, I'll get to more of that in a second, but the ruling was actually quite good. Israel's killed hundreds, right? 2014, last 24 hours. And I know the first 24 hours right after is 100 and something or other. They bombed Syria again. They killed people in Damascus, I believe, yesterday. And so this is just, the slaughter is just going and going. It's remarkable to watch Al Jazeera every day and just get the details all coming in live, the stories. Al Jazeera is doing this whole report on Palestinian kids who've lost parents, and they say there's more than 25,000 that have lost parents, and just the stories are just beyond belief. I mean, just story after story of these kids, just horrible situations, their parents, their siblings all killed. Sometimes is one sibling that's like 7, doesn't want to tell their 4-year-old brother because that their parents are dead and their other siblings are dead. It's just unbelievable stuff. But it just keeps going. And Canada is obviously complicit in so many ways. A few stories. There was a story that Rabbi Miviser shared about Sarel, right? It's a Canadian group that brings volunteers. They pay their way to go to work on Israeli military bases, and they spend 3 weeks a month doing all kinds of things. They wear uniforms and they just all kinds of support work on Israeli military bases. And we brought a campaign. There was a private prosecution on Sarel that Shane Martinez, a lawyer, led, and he got the judge advocate, the justice of the peace, which is sort of basically a judge, to agree to a private prosecution. There was enough evidence, and then the Crown stepped in and just kiboshed it all. So we never got a hearing around the Foreign Enlistment Act, because this is an inducement of providing support to another country's military. And the one of the things that Miviser sent when he sent around, I don't know if he posted on the site, that quoting this person saying that it's a unit of the IDF, of the Israeli military. So Sarel, that advertises openly in Canada to bring Canadians there, they're calling it a unit of the Israeli military, which of course would make promoting it to Canadians, a violation of the Foreign Enlistment Act. But the Canadian state doesn't want to pursue that. There's a story about a doctor he did get reprimanded, fortunately, who for I guess probably a couple months ago now, he said, c'est fini pour Gaza et le Hamas. Après 2 semaines de préavis d'évacuation, c'est l'heure du grand nettoyage. Impossible de distinguer les bons des mauvais. So basically, it's time of the great cleaning. There's no distinction between the good and the bad, basically just calling for slaughter in Gaza. Canadian doctor, Quebec doctor, who he did get reprimanded. There was a bunch of complaints, so he did get reprimanded from the medical association. Story about that in Journal de Montréal. There's a story about Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center. I think it was on the Maple. Groups condemn alleged instruction to report school students for criticizing Israel. About how it came out that the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center is reports students that say things critical of Israel during their propaganda sessions. So they get government funds them to go to give these sessions, the sort of anti-hate or anti-Semitism training stuff. And people ask some kid ask some question about Israel or make some critical comment. And apparently they're like reporting this and then using that, reporting the kids, and then using that to justify the need for more training and more, funding and more, getting a greater place in the school system. So, anyways, a bunch of groups did sign a public letter criticizing this, which is obviously a good thing. There's a story on Canadian Dimension, from vilification to criminalization, which just adds weight to what I've been arguing, that the Zionist movement is the leading fascist force right now, and just the intensity of their campaigns to undercut civil liberties. Canadian Dimension also has a piece called Gaza and Canada's refugee double standard, which goes into about the bringing refugees in from Gaza and this incredible security freak out that all these incredible hurdles that the Mark Miller, the immigration minister, has inserted because it's all this, they of course are the terrorists, right? The good kids who come back from joining the Israeli military in Gaza, those are just good kids. Those are, they're not anything to be threatened by. But the people who've been had their houses destroyed and their families killed, those are a threat to our society. So CBC on Tuesday, I believe. Let's do this the other way around. I was able to catch up with so why does CBC I am recording. Okay. So why does the CBC not refer to it as the genocide Israel's committed? Working on that. But it's always kid gloves, right? It's always kid gloves. The language you use is like the massacre that Hamas committed on October 7th, but you never say the massacre that the slaughter that Israel's committing on a daily basis. Why is that? You're all about power politics. You're all about asking, we're covering the story. I don't appreciate this. You don't appreciate being asked questions. Your reporter doesn't appreciate asking questions. So why the double standard? Why the double standard? You have a strong language what Hamas did, but not about the genocide. We're over 25,000 killed. That's your response? Just walk away. So that was David Cochran. Oh, sorry, somebody just noticed somebody saying very hard to hear. Maybe I should have turned it up. That was David Cochran from the host of CBC's Power and Politics, and I bumped into him at the Liberal cabinet retreat in the mall that's tied to the Queen Elizabeth Hotel, and it was a real fortress. The him, I don't know if you can't understand where he's walking in, and basically it's a fortress. The cops, he goes to the other side. He has the ability to go to the other side, but I know I can't cross over because there's all these cops. You see two cops you can see on camera, but there's actually others as well. And and so to me, it was symbolic of, I thought, how the establishment journalists, like, they're on the inside, right? They get to be part. They're in this hotel that's all security. They're considered part of the, the acceptable crowd, and I was is part, and others, the protest, anyone who protests outside, we were of course the unacceptable crowd. But anyways, I was just challenging Cochrane, and he didn't want to engage with it on coverage of Palestine. I can't claim to have, like, watched every episode of Power and Politics to have, like, a really deeply informed assessment of his coverage. I've seen enough of how he's treated different interviews on the issue to be pretty confident that what I was saying is correct, and I know it generalizes within the CDC, and there's been some reports that have shown that, and it obviously generalizes in the media more generally. There's a good piece on two pieces today that the Maple published about Honest Reporting Canada, titled "Meet the Billionaire Funded Pro-Israel Group Influencing Media," and it's a history of Honest Reporting Canada and how somebody goes into some of the donors, some of the wealthy donors, the Israeli Foundation, Asper Foundation, the Rotman, one of the Rotman, which is, I believe it's the University of Toronto Rotman Business School, I believe, that one of them was on the initial board, one of the Rotman family. And they try to frame themselves as this sort of like grassroots group, but he goes into the history and the funding behind it. It comes out of the Americans, and also the ties to Israel and the Israeli diplomats in Canada that have always been very supportive, promoted some of the fund. There's a little bit of funding that's come, that he's been able to show that's via Israel for some project that Honest Reporting Canada has been part of. And Honest Reporting Canada, of course, is the most influential, best organized media flak organization in the country. They pressure media outlets that say anything critical about Israel. Now, another story that goes into the media and coverage of Palestinians is there's a tour, according to the I think it was a Saturday New York National Post. The editor-in-chief of the National Post, who I didn't mark his name down, and I'm forgetting his name, it might be Roberts or something like that. He has a column titled "Destroying Hamas is All That Matters." And in this column, so it's kind of partly responding to the International Court of Justice ruling, and he says, "I am visiting Israel as part of a sponsored tour for Canadian journalists, a trip organized by businessman Larry Meher on behalf of community leaders partnered with Toronto's Temple Sinai congregation." So some wealthy guy working with a synagogue has brought the head of the National Post. That I'm pretty sure that Warmington from the Toronto Sun is part of this delegation as well, and I presume there's many others. So they're all on this Israel promotion tour, and that, of course, if impacts the media coverage. At the more like sophisticated end of the media establishment, the front of Saturday's Globe and Mail is, I don't know if people can see that properly, but it's an image from South Africa, and it says, "Free fall, 30 years after the end of apartheid, the promise of South Africa is at risk from state failures." So the day after the International Court of Justice rules that Israel is plausibly committing genocide and should cease these genocidal activities, which is essentially what they ruled, no matter what the spin of the pro-Israel crowd. The day after, this great act of international solidarity, really, I mean, states aren't usually, don't act in a that kind of internationalist way very often. The day after, the Globe and Mail decides this is the time to pop on the front page. I'm sure it's something that's been in the works for a long time. That basically South Africa is a disaster. I don't think it's a coincidence, and I think it's a very clear example of the Canadian establishment. That's their response to this act of international solidarity, more sophisticated than these like crazy National Post, Toronto Sun tours of Israel, but nonetheless the effect is very similar. Now, closer to the craziness of that world, the front page of the opinion section is a story to Left in the Lurch. As the war in Gaza rages, Stephen Marsh writes, the extremist champions of today's establishment left have begun a process of self-immolation that threatens to drive progressive politics into oblivion. So basically, by saying that Palestinians shouldn't be genocided, the left is, wrecking itself, and it's gone off into geopolitical. it's a Hamas front, and just a totally unhinged attack against any hint of solidarity. So that's at that more sophisticated Globe and Mail side of the media establishment. There was a story or a post from Anthony Housefather that 27 Canadian universities had responded to his statement in response to the whole Harvard, Penn State, or whatever, Penn University in the States, and MIT, I believe, the whole big brouhaha, 6 weeks ago maybe, about their Palestine, treatment of Jews, whatever. And so all the 27 Canadian universities responded by saying that you wanted to kill Jews, that was like not acceptable, which was ho-hum, like what a surprise. But what Housefather is really saying when he says that is that saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, that is genocidal call, right? That's what he's really trying to set up. And that was what the Harvard business was about as well. So we'll see where he goes with that, but I'm sure it's going to be used against Palestine solidarity. On Friday and Saturday, Saturday was the actual Holocaust Remembrance Day, official day, but Friday was there was a commemoration at the War Memorial in Ottawa. And the global news piece was, "This is not Canada. Holocaust Remembrance Day this year comes at a dark time for the Jewish community, as authorities around the world report a rise in anti-Semitic crimes." And in the story, they make it really clear that much of this is about Palestine. And they have an image of the Indigo, the putting up posters on Indigo saying that Heather Reisman is a supporter of genocide, which she of course is. She's funding non-Israelis to join the Israeli military to participate in it. And that's a big part of what's in the Globe Mail piece too, attacking the left. How dare they? That's what it starts off with, all about government-funded university employees were engaged in, or accused of this heinous act of putting up posters on Indigo. So they're just turning this. They turn the Holocaust remembrance thing into just. It's not even really hidden anymore. It's just a way, Holocaust commemoration to justify genocide. I mean, that's what's going on. And at the event on Friday, Trudeau appeared, the Israeli ambassador appeared, the American ambassador appeared. And I found out about it in advance, and I tweeted out At 11 a.m., Genocide Trudeau, Genocide Joe's ambassador, and the Genocide States ambassador will be at the National War Memorial. Ottawa folks, please disrupt. And it led to a whole big fake outrage. One guy said, "Shame on you for encouraging protests at Holocaust Memorial Day. This is highly offensive to families of victims and is akin to protesting at a funeral. Disgusting and reprehensible activity and have lost all credibility." Well, it has nothing to do with a funeral. Holocaust Remembrance Day was set up in 2005 by the Israeli government. They're the ones that brought it to the UN. They got the UN to agree to it. This is for the first 60 years after the end of the Nazi slaughter. There wasn't this Holocaust Remembrance Day. It's all part of the Holocaust industry that's just been building up in recent years, in recent decades, that Finkelstein were detailed 20 plus years ago, and it's just going more and more and more. And what happened on Friday was, I think, a really a clear example of that, where Trudeau, the fact that the International Court of Justice ruling came down on the same day as and it wasn't actually the actual day, they did it the day before. They did it on the Friday. The day before, it was a Saturday, was the actual day. They did it on the weekday before. The fact that ICJ ruling came down on the same day as the Holocaust Remembrance is part of what pressured, part of the dynamic that led to an absolutely stunning response from the Trudeau government. I was even stunned. I'm pretty cynical about where they're going to go on this question, but it was an absolutely stunning response. They didn't express support for the ruling. They didn't even say that the ruling was legally binding. It was a statement that, like, it didn't, and it focused on the consequences of the case, that, i.e., that this could spur anti-Semitism, as a previous statement on the ICJ ruling had done. So this is part of the dynamic that played out. Now, so that was terrible. The response to ICJ was terrible on the face. But beyond that, and again, this is all tied. This is tied to, and Trudeau spent like a whole bunch of time, hours after the ICJ at the commemoration in Ottawa. And at the other side is that CIJA put out a tweet after Israel claimed that a dozen UNRWA workers, the Refugee Agency for Palestinians in Gaza, that they were involved in October 7th. CIJA released this. The Americans severed their funding, suspended their funding to UNRWA. CIJA pushed it out, and a couple hours later, the International Development Minister suspended Canada's funding to the UN Refugee Agency. So while the ICJ said there was a plausible case for genocide, it said that Israel has to allow humanitarian, has to shift course to allow humanitarian into Gaza. Canada's reaction to this was to cut funding, to starve Palestinians in Gaza. I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around. And there's no doubt about it that part of the political dynamic that shaped Canadian policy was Holocaust Remembrance Day, and how that is intertwined with a whole process of justifying whatever Israel does, puts Trudeau, Liberals, anyone in the media on the back foot. It's a remarkable stick, right? The anti-Semitism stick to beat people into enabling genocide. This is what we're seeing playing out, and it's completely abominable and stunning to watch. There is a good side to obviously the ICJ ruling, like I've said, is a very good ruling, about as good as we could have realistically expected. It looks like there's some lawyers in Canada. I don't know the details. Canada Files had a piece today saying that they are going to be pursuing legal actions around Canadian special forces in Palestine and to prosecute Canadian officials. The ICJ ruling strengthened the case to prosecute Canadian officials for enabling genocide. And there's also a column in the conversation by three lawyers making that point as well, that now if Canada continues this way, it is complicit in genocide. And clearly, with what they've done with UNRWA, it shows that. Now, final two little points just to say, I'm sure people saw that 3 U.S. soldiers were killed in Syria yesterday. The Americans are saying they're going to respond. The right in the Republican right is calling for bombing Iran. So I talked about this last week. We have a real possibility of a further escalation. There's all kinds of conflicts going on throughout the region. Who knows where this is all going to go? But at the source of much of this, obviously the U.S. has had troops in the region for a long time, and they should be withdrawn, basically as a blanket. But a major accelerator of these tensions, of course, is what Israel is doing to Palestinians in Gaza. The upside we can see in all this is that there is still mass protest. There was 3,000 plus in Montreal on Sunday. There was some smaller actions. There's 3 different local actions at different MPs' offices on Sunday as well. And I know it was like 18 MPs across the country where that was taking place. So the mobilization still strong. There was, I think I saw a list of like 24 almost cities across the country where there were demonstrations. So despite the cold, there's a remarkable mobilization. I just saw today that the Muslim groups, it's the commemoration of the massacre today, that they refused Justin Trudeau's request to speak at their event because of what's going on in what he's enabling in Gaza. I'll leave it there. And I made Laura, I think I made you a co-host.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got Yuri and Hans, and we'll take those two first. Okay, so sorry, Yuri, I'll try to unmute you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Yuri, I think somehow we ended up muting you. Okay, go ahead,
Okay,
Yuri.
can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And good to see you again, Lauren. I hope you had a good Christmas and Happy New Year to you.
You too.
So Eve, I'm going to ask you this. Well, actually, before asking this question, I just want to say, while there is a lot to criticize South Africa, and in memory of John Pilger, we should plug his documentary "Apartheid Did Not Die." You even talked about how Canada and Canadian mining corporations actually propped up economic apartheid, which continued after racial apartheid was abolished. But that being said, I still think well done to South Africa for what they did at the ICG.
Yeah.
So my question is, does South Africa's historic victory at the ICJ on behalf of Palestine mean we will see other members of BRICS take on anti-imperialist causes? You talked about Haiti, so can we see nations take up Haiti's cause or indigenous self-determination in the Five Eyes Nation, West Papua, Diego Garcia, or I'll just leave my question at that.
I doubt it. I think that it probably South Africa, if South Africa would have got really smacked down by the ICJ, the South African officials were quite clear. They wanted to say that the Americans called it meritless, and a couple other countries were attacking them. I don't follow South African media, but I presume the opposition in South Africa was or at least the right-wing opposition was amplifying that criticism of the ANC. and so the fact that South Africa sort of, I guess, vindicated in a sense, that probably is, would have some, be on the radar of other countries and some of that stuff. But I don't think it's going to necessarily, change some profound way of how these states, like I said, I think it's really rare for states to act in a solidaristic way like this. I think that the ANC government, I'm sure this plays quite well to their base. And I wouldn't want to claim that this is all just sort of like, this is just, international solidarity of the South African state. There's political dynamics within South Africa that almost certainly, when you have an ANC government, this is my impression. I say this tentatively, but a government that's basically goes along with the capitalist order. And there's lots of, there's the economic freedom fighters and other sort of left-wing forces criticizing for that. And so doing this kind of thing for Palestine, that gets a lot of sympathy among the leftward, base of the ANC. So I assume that was part of their calculation. But at the same time, clearly a big part of their calculation was just genuine, internationalism. And so that's a pretty rare kind of thing to see. And hopefully there'll be more of it, but I wouldn't hold my breath on that.
Okay, Hans, you're up.
My question is the following. In contrast to the Ukraine war, in this Israeli war on Palestine, we have not seen, or I haven't seen, any involvement of China. And my question is, would it not be prudent and opportune if, given the cuts in UNRWA funding, if China stepped in and said, we will pick up the slack, and thereby they would greatly enhance their stock with the southern half of the planet and shoot across the bow of Biden's claim to be the world hegemon. So it's a little wish list question. I don't know if anybody's got any influence on the ambassador of China in Canada, but that's what I would ask him. What's your comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. But I would try to like consider some of those dynamics more generally, in that, none of the Arab countries have really acted, right? And so the countries that in principle are the sort of most affected and most pro-Palestinian, they haven't really acted. Like, none of the countries that normalized have reversed course, normalized with Israel. That's pretty remarkable. So from the standpoint of China doing that as an act of solidarity, even on the South Africa case, the Arab countries didn't really, like, I think by the end, some of them had come out, the Organization of Islamic States, OIC or whatever, they said they supported South Africa's case, but a lot of it was really slow moving, right? They didn't come out and support South Africa's case. And I know that's, like, you hear a lot of that. You hear, whenever you hear people interviewed from Gaza on Al Jazeera, they're always go after the Arab countries. They're just totally appalled by the Arab countries. So that would be a big factor in China, doing something like that, right? If China thought this was something that would be really popular with Riyadh, would be really popular in, probably Riyadh would be one of the countries they would care most about in the region. But, and I don't know that it would be, right? I don't know that it would be popular in Riyadh. I don't know exactly. So that would be, yes, I think it would be seen quite positively among countries in, I mean, obviously the people of the Arab world, it would be, probably 99% of people would think it was a good thing. So those things are part of it. And now I don't think it's correct to say that China hasn't engaged at all. I'm pretty sure I saw a Financial Times piece about about kind of China reiterating its call for a two-state solution. And I agree with you that they have not been aggressively criticizing Israel. But you have to also remember that Israel has, there's trade relations, there's high-tech stuff that China gets from Israel and stuff like that. So that's, I think, all part of the calculation. I don't think the Chinese government is acting in a particularly internationalist kind of way.
Okay, Larry? Larry Neufeld? He's unmuted. Larry, you're up if you have a question. Okay, well, I'm not quite sure what's happening with you, but I'll get Laurel to unmute. Laurel, go ahead.
I'll jump in. Yeah. Isn't the reason why the Arab countries have not been very vocal about what the ICJ has done because they don't want to criticize the United States, because that's where their money is. That's where a lot of their funds are being kept, and they're worried about being punished the same way Russia was punished with the funds that the Americans unfroze and then sent to Ukraine, I think it was. Like the United States has the same control over the Arab countries that Israel has over us. I mean, they do the same thing. The two countries do the same thing all the time. They learn from each other.
Well, I mean, I think there's no doubt that the reason why the Arab countries they're mostly reactionary regimes that are pro-US, and the US has bases all across bases in pretty much every country. So yeah, there's no doubt, and they're also scared of Israel. Israel is there was a time when there was much more organized Arab support for anti-Israel. Israel is a far, far more powerful country today than 30, 40 years ago, and so the Arab countries are substantially more fearful. Yeah, I mean, it's a calculation, and it's a calculation tied to the geopolitical dynamics. I think also when there was the Soviet Union, that played a role in some of the counter block and stuff like that. Yeah, that's the calculation going on.
Okay, there's someone on the phone. I don't see their name. Go ahead. Who's ever calling in?
Hi. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, it's Catherine. Yeah, it's Catherine Hughes calling from Nova Scotia,
Hi.
unceded Mi'kmaq. And I just first of all, the Arab League also supported South Africa's case at the ICJ. But I wanted to talk about CBC because somebody within the CBC told me that they are told that they are not allowed to say that they're not allowed to let people say the word genocide, or they aren't allowed to use the word genocide in shows. And I mean, I know they have been since the ICJ case. They've had to, but and I've been trying to find this out. Like, this was a couple weeks ago that I was told. It was because I called in with a song request for the Gaza Youth Choir and said it was, it's something about in honor of people who are suffering genocide. And they called and said, we're going to have to edit that. But I've been trying for the last 2 weeks to get a hold of somebody to try to find out what the policy is.
Can you just make that clear? So you said that in your like a message on the box or something like that, where you use the word genocide, and they explicitly said we're going to have to cut that out?
Yes, they called out of courtesy to say, like, the person who called me, I think clearly didn't agree with the policy and said to me, would you like us to play it anyway, or should we edit it? And I said, I'm going to have to think about that. And then I thought about it a bit, and I said, well, if there's any way you can edit it and make it, make it a little bit noticeable that you've edited out something. But I said, go ahead, edit it, because, I wanted something in there. At least it said it was the Gaza Youth Choir, and anyway, I have not been able to find. I've been calling audience relations, CBC News in Halifax, a couple different numbers for that, and
Well,
yeah. And
well,
I looked online. I don't know
if
where
you're
to find the policy.
Oh, I don't think they're going to have that. You're not going to find that on paper. They're not going to confirm that. If they do confirm that, please do get in touch with me with any documentation of that. But I would be doubtful they're gonna admit that in any public kind of way. But we do know that there was a breach story 3 or 4 days ago, a week ago, 10, I don't, not that long ago, that had a CBC, somebody who made a complaint to the CBC about the language they use for Hamas October 7th, and they admit that they use like slaughter and murderous or whatever, strong language, and then they admitted that they don't use that language for the killing Israel's doing. And this was like the CBC ombuds person, I believe, or that type of position, and they admitted that they used the words like aggressive campaign, anyway, just softer language for what Israel's doing, and their rationale was that Israel is. It's like coming from afar. It's like drones or bombs from afar versus what Hamas did was like soldiers right there and shooting and which is pretty dubious response on its face. But even more is that they use that same type of language that Russia does, and Russia, of course, is sending when Russia sends drones or rockets, they're often 100 kilometers away or however far away. It's not like hand-to-hand combat, but they still use that kind of like murderous kind of language for what Russia does when it's more like high-tech war, if you like. So they admitted that, and I thought was pretty surprising. And the breach reported on it, and they kind of they basically said this was a pretty stark double standard, which it is. And we obviously know that CBC, a couple of years ago, there was the big kerfuffle about how they refused to use the word Palestine, and they actually have that was down on paper. That was like a communique that they sent around, and then the radio host apologized for using the word Palestine in an interview with an author of a graphic novel titled Palestine. We know the bias is taking place. I would be surprised if they admitted that unjustly. But even what you've recounted, in and of itself, I think is something that should be at least put on social media or kind of. I'm happy that you brought it to this forum because it's sign of the media bias.
Okay, Larry's back. Larry, are you able to speak now?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, we can.
Oh, okay, good. I don't know what's going on before. I just wanted to ask, like, somebody sent me something about UN Watch, justifying that was the reason that UNRWA was being being defunded. I don't know if anybody knows anything about it. I took a quick look at it. It seems like Erwin Kotler is on the board of it or something like that. How legitimate is the information that actually comes off of this website? I'm wondering. If you're familiar with it, I'm not sure if you are or not.
Yeah. UN Watch. Hillel Noor is the head of UN Watch. That was the one where in the a little over a year ago, he was speaking at a synagogue here in Montreal. And actually right after a CFPI hour, I took the metro across and I biked over to Noor's talk. And when I got in and he was talking, I said he was an anti-Palestinian bigot. And the rabbi of the synagogue Boopko, who's on the board of CIJA Quebec, punched me very hard in the stomach. Got like 4 or 5 guys to he said kick him in the head, anyway, I got beat by a mix of security and the organizer of the talk. So yeah, UN Watch is a joke. Hillel Neuer is a he's an anti-Palestinian bigot. I called him whatever that was 15 months ago. So no, it's not it's part of a series of UN Watch is, so maybe I'm getting mixed up with UN Monitor. No, I'm maybe I'm getting that mixed up with Monitor. Anyways, but I'm actually now I think about, is it UN Monitor? That no, I'm thinking Hillel Neuer is the UN Monitor. So I actually don't know about if it's not. I'm just searching it now. But there's a whole series of these pro-Israel. No, UN Watch. Yes. Hillel Neuer. Yeah, so it's been like basically it's like 15 years now, 10, 15 years it's been going. It's all part of this whole, like, there's a UN is just an anti-Israel forum and trying to make the case that the UN is illegitimate in its criticism of Israel. And I think it's somewhat sophisticated kind of political activity, but when you've been following this stuff for a while, it's there's a whole network of these organizations that they have one principal objective, which is to protect Israel from criticism. And it's just another one of those. That's what Honest Reporting Canada is about, and number of them.
Eva, there's no more question. I have a question, but I just want to say quickly. Also, I mean, I don't know how true it is, but I know I've read that the Arab states, the Gulf monarchies, they haven't disrupted any of their financial ties with Israel either. Like, they're just still transporting oil. They're doing all this stuff. So they're awful. They're not doing anything, but it's possible they'll step in with UNRWA funding. I don't know. We'll see. But my question pertains to UNRWA funding, which is in Great Britain. I was reading that they've been making efforts, the government, to prevent citizens from donating to UNRWA. In fact, they may have stopped. I don't know how you can legally do that. But I was just wondering, assuming in Canada you haven't had that problem, they're actually preventing citizens from donating?
I haven't heard that, and I did see that. I saw some people that lawyer that actually just wrote commentary. She announced on Twitter that she had just donated for the first time to UNRWA. So I think she's in Toronto. I think she's a U of T prof. So I presume that there isn't that problem, but I don't know that one way or another.
Okay, so there are no further questions. So thanks, Eve.
Thanks, everyone. Same place, same time next week. Take care.
Thanks.